No one cared about Mama Dragon begging to save her baby, until a human janitor did the impossible. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. Deep within the gleaming corridors of Celestial Station Omega-7, the most prestigious xenobiological research facility in the galaxy, a desperate situation was unfolding in the restricted lower levels. While the upper decks hosted diplomatic meetings between 12 advanced civilizations, something far more urgent was happening below. Blake Turner had always been invisible. For 3 years, he had worked as a maintenance technician, or as everyone called him, a janitor, on Celestial Station Omega-7. His dark blue uniform blended with the shadows of the massive space station as he silently cleaned floors, repaired minor systems, and stayed out of the way of the important people. To the scientists and diplomats who populated the upper levels, Blake was nothing more than a moving piece of furniture, present but unnoticed, necessary but unacknowledged. But Blake didn't mind. At 32, he had seen enough of humanity's chaos on Earth to appreciate the predictable rhythm of station life. His small quarters were comfortable, the pay was decent, and the view of the stars from the maintenance bay windows was spectacular. Most importantly, working on Omega-7 gave him access to alien species and technologies most humans would never see. For someone who had grown up fascinated by the stars, that alone made the job worthwhile. On this particular day, Blake was assigned to clean the lower research levels, an unusual task since those areas were typically maintained by specialized robotic systems. The head of maintenance had explained that a power fluctuation had disabled several cleaning bots, and someone needed to handle their duties until repairs were completed. Just don't touch anything in the labs, his supervisor had warned. Clean the corridors, empty the waste units, and stay out of the research chambers. The scientists are working with some sensitive specimens, and they don't want contamination. For questions, Blake nodded and gathered his supplies, hiding his excitement. The lower levels were where the station kept its most interesting specimens and conducted its most sensitive research. He'd heard rumors from other maintenance workers about strange creatures and mysterious experiments, but he'd never had the clearance to see for himself. As he descended in the service elevator, Blake reviewed the station map on his tablet. The lower research deck was divided into 8 sections, each dedicated to different fields of xenobiology. His assignment covered sections 3 through 7, the waste extraction corridors and the outer maintenance pathways. The inner chambers, where the actual specimens were kept, were off-limits. The elevator doors opened to reveal a sterile, white corridor illuminated by soft blue lights. Unlike the upper levels, with their elegant architecture and panoramic viewports, the research deck was purely functional. The air carried a distinct antiseptic smell with underlying notes of something Blake couldn't identify, something alien. He pushed his cleaning cart forward, beginning his routine. The work was mindless but comfortable in its familiarity. As he moved through the corridors, Blake noticed something odd. The station was unusually quiet. Normally, even on the restricted levels, there would be scientists and research assistants moving between labs. Today, the halls were empty. Blake checked his tablet. There was no scheduled evacuation or shift change. According to the station calendar, this should be peak research hours. The silence made him uneasy. Reaching Section 5, Blake began mopping the floor outside one of the larger research chambers. The door to the lab was sealed with a red security light indicating restricted access. As he worked, a sound caught his attention, a low, rhythmic vibration coming from inside the lab. It wasn't mechanical. It sounded almost like humming or singing. Blake pressed his ear against the door. The sound was clearer now, a melodic, undulating pattern that rose and fell in a way no human voice could achieve. It reminded him of whale songs he'd heard in nature documentaries, but with a complexity that suggested intelligence far beyond that of Earth's sea creatures. Then, cutting through the melody, came another sound, a sharp, distressed cry. It was higher-pitched, almost like the sound of a wounded animal. Blake's heart raced. Whatever was making that sound was in pain. He glanced down the empty corridor. No scientists. No security. Just him and the distressed cries growing more frantic behind the door. Blake knew the rules. Never enter restricted areas. Never interfere with research. Never risk his job for curiosity. But those cries weren't just sounds of discomfort. They were desperate pleas. Making a split-second decision, Blake pulled out his maintenance override card. It wasn't supposed to work on research labs, but he discovered months ago that a system glitch allowed access to certain doors if you cycled the power while scanning. A trick he'd never had reason to use, until now. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Blake stepped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. The laboratory was vast, at least 3 times larger than it appeared from outside. The central area contained standard research equipment, monitoring stations, sample containers, and diagnostic tools. But the far wall was entirely transparent, revealing an enormous containment chamber beyond. Inside the chamber was a creature unlike anything Blake had ever seen. At first glance, it resembled an earth dragon from ancient mythology, a serpentine body covered in iridescent scales that shifted color with each movement, for powerful limbs ending in clawed appendages, and a long, elegant neck supporting a distinctly reptilian head. But the similarities ended there. The creature's scales weren't solid but seemed composed of crystalline structures that refracted light in hypnotic patterns. Where wings might be on a mythological dragon, this being had what looked like fins made of translucent material that rippled with bioluminescent energy. Most striking were its eyes, large, faceted organs that glowed with an inner intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. The dragon-like creature was curled protectively around something smaller, a juvenile of its species, no larger than a house cat. The smaller being appeared listless, its crystalline scales dull and its breathing labored. As Blake stared in awe, the larger creature turned its gaze toward him. There was no aggression in those luminous eyes, only desperation and what Blake could only interpret as pleading. The melodic humming he'd heard from outside intensified, and with a shock, Blake realized the creature was trying to communicate. "I'm sorry," he whispered, knowing it couldn't understand him. "I don't know what you're saying." The creature pressed a clawed appendage against the transparent barrier, and the humming changed pitch. The smaller being, its child, Blake presumed, shuddered and made that same distressed cry he'd heard from the corridor. Blake approached the monitoring station. The screens displayed information about the specimens, designated crystalline dracomorphs, according to the data, native to a gas giant moon called Talithia 4, captured during a research expedition 6 months ago. Current status: adult female stable. Juvenile male critical condition, requiring specific atmospheric compounds not available in standard containment. Blake's eyes widened as he read further. The juvenile was dying because it needed trace elements found only in its native atmosphere. Elements the station had in storage, but that the research team had deemed too costly to administer for a non-essential specimen. They were letting the baby die because saving it wasn't worth the expense. The adult female, the mother, had been communicating her needs for weeks, according to the logs. The scientists had recorded her vocalizations but had made no attempt to address her pleas. They were simply documenting the juvenile's decline as an unfortunate research opportunity. Blake felt sick. He'd always believed the station's mission was to understand and protect alien life, not to coldly document its suffering. The mother's desperate humming took on new meaning. She wasn't just communicating, she was begging for help. As if sensing his understanding, the mother dragon intensified her humming, creating a complex melody that somehow conveyed both desperation and hope. The baby whimpered weakly. Blake checked the time on his tablet. The research team was scheduled to return in less than an hour. If he was going to help, it had to be now. He accessed the station's inventory system through his maintenance credentials. The atmospheric compounds needed were stored in the chemical repository 2 levels down. His clearance wouldn't get him access, but he knew someone who could help. Blake opened a secure communication channel on his tablet. "Natalie, it's Blake. I need a favor, and I can't explain why right now, but it's life or death." Natalie Quinn was a junior research assistant who had always treated Blake with kindness. One of the few who actually saw the maintenance workers as people rather than moving furniture. They'd shared late-night conversations in the station's cafeteria when their shifts overlapped, bonding over their shared love of Earth's classical literature. "Blake, what's going on? You sound stressed." Natalie's voice came through clearly. "I need access to the chemical repository. Specifically, I need samples of methane-sulfur compounds from Storage Unit 17B and xenon-based stabilizers from Unit 22C. A pause. "Those are restricted materials. They're only used for specific atmospheric recreations. Why would you need those?" Blake took a deep breath. "There's a dying juvenile crystalline dracomorph in Lab 5, Section 5. Its mother has been begging for help for weeks, and the research team is just letting it die because the compounds are too costly. I can't just stand by and watch." Another, longer pause. "Blake, if you're caught interfering with research specimens, you'll lose your job. Maybe worse." "I know. But this isn't just a specimen, Natalie. It's a child. And its mother is watching it die while begging for help that no one will give." Blake's voice cracked. "If it were human, we'd call this torture." He heard Natalie sigh. "Give me 15 minutes. I'll bring the compounds to the service entrance near Section 5. But Blake, be careful. The Talithian specimens are Dr. Vrexic's personal project. He's not known for his forgiveness." "Thank you, Natalie. I owe you." While waiting for Natalie, Blake studied the containment systems. The chamber had an atmospheric regulation unit that could be programmed to introduce the compounds once they arrived. But there was a problem. The system required administrator authorization to modify environmental settings. Blake thought quickly. He couldn't hack the main system, but maybe he didn't need to. The maintenance override might not work on the primary controls, but the emergency ventilation system was tied to station safety protocols, which fell under maintenance jurisdiction. He found the emergency ventilation access panel and began reconfiguring it to connect with the containment chamber's atmospheric regulation unit. It was delicate work, requiring him to bypass several safety interlocks without triggering alarms. As he worked, the mother dragon watched him intently, her humming taking on a questioning tone. The baby's condition was deteriorating rapidly, its breathing becoming more labored, its crystalline scales losing their luster. "Just hold on," Blake murmured. "Help is coming." His tablet chimed with a message from Natalie. "I'm at the service entrance. Hurry." Blake rushed to meet her, his heart pounding with each step. The corridors remained eerily empty, but he knew that could change at any moment. Natalie was waiting at the service entrance, a sealed container in her hands. Her expression was a mixture of concern and determination. "Here," she said, handing him the container. "The methane-sulfur compounds are in the blue vials, the xenon stabilizers in the red. You'll need to introduce them in precisely the right ratio, or you could make things worse." "How do I know the right ratio?" Natalie handed him a data chip. "This contains the atmospheric composition of Talithia 4. I pulled it from the research database. It should tell you exactly what you need." Blake took the chip gratefully. "Thank you, Natalie. I mean it." She nodded. "I've always thought there was something wrong with how we treat some of the specimens here. But Blake, be careful. I need to get back before someone notices I'm gone." As Natalie hurried away, Blake returned to the lab. The mother dragon's humming intensified when she saw him, especially when she noticed the container in his hands. Blake inserted the data chip into his tablet and studied the information. The atmospheric composition of Talithia 4 was complex, a delicate balance of compounds that created the perfect environment for the crystalline dracomorphs. According to the data, the juvenile needed a specific ratio of methane-sulfur and xenon-based elements to develop properly. Without them, its crystalline structure would fail to form correctly, leading to a cascade of systemic failures. Working quickly, Blake prepared the mixture according to the specifications. He then connected his makeshift ventilation bypass to the containment chamber and began the process of introducing the compounds. A warning flashed on the monitoring station. Unauthorized atmospheric modification detected. The system would alert security soon if he didn't complete the process quickly. Blake finished the final connections and initiated the sequence. A fine mist began to fill the containment chamber, carrying the life-saving compounds to the dying juvenile. For several tense moments, nothing happened. The mother dragon curled more tightly around her baby, her humming taking on a mournful quality that broke Blake's heart. Then, almost imperceptibly, the juvenile's crystalline scales began to brighten. Its breathing, which had been shallow and irregular, started to stabilize. The mother's humming changed to a higher, more melodic pattern that somehow conveyed hope. Blake checked the atmospheric readings. The compounds were integrating perfectly, creating an environment that mimicked the Dracomorph's home moon. The juvenile's vital signs, displayed on the monitoring station, were slowly improving. It was working. Relief flooded through Blake, quickly followed by panic as he heard voices in the corridor outside. The research team was returning early. He disconnected his equipment and gathered his tools, preparing to slip out through the service entrance. But before he could leave, he turned back to look at the creatures one last time. The mother dragon was watching him, her luminous eyes fixed on his. As their gazes met, she pressed her clawed appendage against the transparent barrier and bowed her head in what could only be interpreted as gratitude. Blake nodded in acknowledgement. "You're welcome," he whispered. Then he slipped out through the service entrance, just as the main door to the lab opened to admit the returning scientists. Blake made it back to his cleaning cart and resumed his duties, heart still racing. He had no way of knowing if the treatment would be enough to save the juvenile long-term, or what would happen when the research team discovered the unauthorized atmospheric changes. All he could do was continue his work and hope. As he pushed his cart toward the next section, his tablet chimed with a message from Natalie. They know someone accessed the containment systems. Security is reviewing logs. Be careful. Blake sent a simple acknowledgement and deleted the conversation. He needed to maintain his routine and appear as invisible as he always had been. For the next 2 days, Blake heard nothing about the incident. He continued his maintenance duties on other levels of the station, away from the research sections. With each passing hour, his anxiety grew. Had the juvenile survived? Had they discovered his involvement? The questions gnawed at him, but he had no way to find answers without raising suspicion. On the 3rd day, his supervisor called him to the maintenance office. Blake's stomach dropped as he walked through the door, certain he was about to be fired, or worse. Instead, his supervisor handed him a new assignment. You're being transferred to the research levels permanently. Seems Dr. Vrexic specifically requested you by name. Blake froze. Dr. Vrexic? The head xenobiologist. The very same. Wouldn't say why he wanted you, but when someone of his status makes a request, we don't ask questions. Report to Research Section 5 tomorrow morning. Blake nodded numbly and left the office, his mind racing. Dr. Vrexic was requesting him personally? The man was legendary, brilliant, demanding, and notoriously hard to please. He was also the lead scientist studying the crystalline dracomorphs. This couldn't be good. That night, Blake barely slept. He considered resigning and taking the next transport back to Earth, but something held him back. He needed to know if the juvenile had survived. He needed to see the mother dragon one more time. The next morning, Blake reported to Research Section 5 as ordered. A research assistant directed him to Dr. Vrexic's private laboratory, a smaller, more specialized facility adjacent to the main containment chamber. Dr. Vrexic was waiting for him. The scientist was tall and thin, with sharp features and penetrating eyes that seemed to look through Blake rather than at him. Turner, Blake. Maintenance technician. 3 years on station with an unremarkable record. Dr. Vrexic recited the facts without consulting any notes. Until 3 days ago, when you used a maintenance override to access a restricted laboratory, obtained controlled substances through a research assistant, and modified the atmospheric composition in a containment chamber housing 2 of my most valuable specimens. Blake's heart sank. There was no point denying it. Yes, sir. Do you know the penalty for such actions, Turner? Termination of employment and possible criminal charges, sir. Dr. Vrexic nodded. Indeed. So you can imagine my dilemma when I discovered what had happened. He gestured for Blake to follow him into the laboratory. Come with me. There's something you should see. Blake followed, expecting to be shown evidence of his actions, or perhaps even the security recordings. Instead, Dr. Vrexic led him to a viewing window overlooking the main containment chamber. Inside, the mother dragon was no longer alone with her juvenile. The baby, now noticeably larger and more vibrant, was actively moving around the chamber, its crystalline scales glittering with health and vitality. The mother watched over it, occasionally nudging it with her snout in what appeared to be playful interaction. 3 weeks, Dr. Vrexic said quietly. That's how long we'd been monitoring the juvenile's decline. According to all our models, it should have died within days. Yet here it is, not only alive, but thriving. He turned to face Blake. How did you know the exact atmospheric composition it needed? Blake swallowed hard. I read the data on the monitoring station. It showed what compounds were missing. And research assistant Quinn, provided the specific ratios from the Talithia 4 data. And what made you decide to intervene? What possible interest could a maintenance technician have in the welfare of alien specimens? Blake looked through the viewing window at the creatures. The mother had noticed them and was watching intently, her luminous eyes fixed on Blake. She was asking for help, Blake said simply. She was watching her child die, and no one was listening to her. I couldn't just walk away. Dr. Vrexic studied him for a long moment. Do you know why we hadn't administered the atmospheric compounds, Turner? The log said they were deemed too costly for a non-essential specimen. The scientist's expression hardened. That was the official justification, yes. The truth is more complicated. Those were not my instructions. I was on Centauri Prime for a conference when the juvenile began showing signs of distress. My assistant, Dr. Keller, made the decision to withhold treatment. Why would he do that? Politics. Dr. Vrexic's voice was bitter. The crystalline dracomorphs were discovered in territory claimed by both the Arcturian Collective and the Terran Alliance. By documenting the death of the juvenile, Keller hoped to provide evidence that the species couldn't survive in captivity, thereby preventing either side from removing more specimens from their natural habitat. He was willing to let it die to make a political point. Yes, a noble goal perhaps, but his methods were. Dr. Vrexic paused, searching for the right word, unconscionable. We're scientists. Our duty is to understand life, not sacrifice it for convenience or ideology. He turned to face Blake directly. Which brings me to you, Turner. You broke numerous regulations. You accessed restricted areas. You obtained controlled substances. You modified sensitive equipment without authorization. Blake straightened his shoulders. I understand, sir. I'll pack my things and be on the next transport back to Earth. To his surprise, Dr. Vrexic laughed. Pack your things? Oh no, Turner. You misunderstand me. I'm not firing you. He gestured toward the containment chamber. Do you see how the mother is looking at you? She recognizes you. More importantly, she trusts you. That's extraordinarily rare with xenofauna, particularly species with intelligence levels as high as the dracomorphs. Blake looked at the mother dragon, who was indeed watching him with focused attention, her head tilted slightly, as if in curiosity or recognition. Sir, I want to offer you a position, Turner. Not as maintenance staff, but as a research assistant specializing in dracomorph care. You've demonstrated an intuitive understanding of these creatures that my team lacks. You saw what trained xenobiologists missed, that the mother was communicating, not just making noise. Blake blinked in surprise. But I don't have any scientific training. I'm just a janitor. A janitor who did what an entire research team failed to do. You listened. Dr. Vrexic's expression softened slightly. Training can be provided, Turner. Empathy cannot. And in my experience, understanding comes more readily to those who possess the latter. Before Blake could respond, an alarm blared throughout the laboratory. Red warning lights flashed, and the station's AI announced, Alert. Unauthorized access to Section 5 containment. Security breach in progress. Dr. Vrexic rushed to a monitoring station. Someone's overriding the containment field controls. His fingers flew across the interface. They're attempting to purge the atmospheric modifications you made. Blake joined him at the console. On the screen, he could see that someone was systematically reversing all the changes he had made to the containment chamber's environment. If they succeeded, the carefully balanced atmosphere would be replaced with standard station air, deadly to the juvenile dracomorph. Can you stop it? Blake asked urgently. The commands are coming from a senior authorization code. Mine should override it, but Dr. Vrexic's expression darkened. It's not working. Someone's locked me out of my own systems. Through the viewing window, Blake could see the mother dragon becoming agitated. She sensed the danger, curling protectively around her child as a faint mist began to fill the chamber. The beginning of the atmospheric purge. Who would do this? Blake demanded. Keller. Dr. Vrexic spat the name. He must have discovered the juvenile's recovery. He's trying to complete what he started. Blake looked frantically around the laboratory. There has to be something we can do. Dr. Vrexic shook his head. The purge sequence is hardwired into the containment systems. Once initiated with proper authorization, it can only be stopped from the central security hub or, his eyes widened, or by a manual override from inside the containment chamber itself. Blake looked at the increasingly panicked mother dragon and her vulnerable child. The purge mist was growing thicker. They had minutes, perhaps less. How do I get in there? He asked. Dr. Vrexic stared at him. You can't be serious. Even if you could enter the chamber, the atmospheric composition is toxic to humans. You'd lose consciousness within minutes. But not instantly. No, not instantly. The human body can tolerate brief exposure, but then I have time. Blake was already moving toward the containment chamber's maintenance access. Tell me how to stop the purge. After a moment's hesitation, Dr. Vrexic nodded. There's a manual override panel on the far wall of the chamber. Enter sequence Alpha 97 Delta 6. That will terminate the purge and lock out further commands for 1 hour. But Turner, he grabbed Blake's arm. You won't have time to get out before the toxicity affects you. And I won't be able to purge the chamber to rescue you without endangering the dracomorphs. Blake nodded. I understand. But I can't just watch them die. Dr. Vrexic released his arm and handed him a breathing mask from an emergency kit. This won't protect you completely, but it might buy you an extra minute or two. Blake took the mask and moved to the maintenance access hatch. As he prepared to enter, Dr. Vrexic said quietly, What you're doing is either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, Turner. Blake managed to smile. Maybe a bit of both, sir. With that, he opened the access hatch and stepped into the airlock leading to the containment chamber. The transition was immediate and disorienting. Even through the breathing mask, Blake could smell the alien atmosphere, a sharp, sulfurous scent that made his eyes water. The air felt thick and heavy in his lungs, each breath requiring conscious effort. As the inner door opened, Blake stumbled into the containment chamber. The purge mist was now a dense fog, obscuring his vision beyond a few feet. He could hear the mother dragon's distressed humming somewhere ahead of him. I'm here to help, he called out, hoping his intent would somehow be understood despite the language barrier. Blake moved forward, fighting the growing dizziness that threatened to overwhelm him. Each step was a struggle against the toxic atmosphere and his body's increasingly desperate signals to escape. Suddenly, a large shape loomed out of the mist, the mother dragon, her crystalline scales glittering as she positioned herself between Blake and her child. Her humming had changed to a low, warning tone. She doesn't recognize me in the mask, Blake realized. She thinks I'm a threat. With shaking hands, he removed the breathing mask, immediately gasping as the full force of the toxic atmosphere hit his unprotected lungs. It's me, he wheezed, looking directly into the dragon's luminous eyes. I'm trying to save you. Both of you. For a moment, the massive creature stared at him, her faceted eyes unreadable. Then, in a movement that seemed almost impossible for her size, she gracefully moved aside, clearing his path to the far wall where the override panel was located. Blake staggered forward, his vision beginning to blur. The override panel was a small, recessed control unit nearly hidden in the chamber wall. As he reached for it, his legs gave way, and he collapsed to his knees. No, not when I'm this close. Drawing on his last reserves of strength, Blake pulled himself up enough to reach the panel. His fingers, numb and clumsy now, punched in the sequence, Alpha 97 Delta 6. The panel flashed green, and instantly the purge mist began to dissipate. A mechanical voice announced, "Purge sequence terminated. Environmental controls locked for 1 hour." Relief flooded through Blake, quickly followed by the realization that he had no way out. His body was failing rapidly in the toxic atmosphere. His lungs burned with each breath, and darkness crept in at the edges of his vision. As consciousness began to slip away, Blake felt something warm and solid press against his side. The mother dragon had moved next to him, her large body radiating heat. With gentle pressure, she nudged him toward a corner of the chamber where the air seemed slightly clearer. Blake didn't have the strength to resist. He allowed himself to be guided to the corner, where he collapsed against the wall. The mother dragon positioned herself beside him, creating a partial barrier between Blake and the worst of the toxic atmosphere. "She's trying to protect me," he realized with wonder, "just as I protected her child." As darkness closed in, Blake felt a strange sense of peace. He might not survive, but the Dracomorphs would. Sometimes that was enough. His last conscious thought was of the mother dragon's luminous eyes watching over him, and the soft, melodic humming that now seemed almost like a lullaby. Blake drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the struggle for each breath and the comforting presence of the mother dragon beside him. Time lost all meaning in that hazy borderland between awareness and oblivion. A new sound eventually penetrated the fog in his mind, the hiss of the airlock opening, followed by urgent voices and the thud of boots on the chamber floor. Through half-closed eyes, Blake saw figures in environmental suits rushing toward him. The mother dragon tensed beside him, her humming taking on a warning tone. She shifted her position, placing herself more firmly between Blake and the approaching figures. "She's protecting him," he heard Dr. Vrexic's voice, distorted through an environmental suit speaker. "Incredible." Another voice, female, familiar, responded. "We need to get him out now. His vital signs are critical." "Natalie." It was Natalie Quinn. "The Dracomorph won't let us near him," Dr. Vrexic said, "and we can't risk sedating her with the juvenile present." Blake struggled to speak, to tell them it was okay, but his body wouldn't respond. The toxic atmosphere had taken too great a toll. Then, to everyone's surprise, the mother dragon moved. Keeping her luminous eyes fixed on the rescue team, she carefully backed away from Blake, creating a path for them to reach him. Her humming changed to a complex pattern that somehow conveyed both warning and permission. "She understands," Dr. Vrexic whispered. "She knows we're trying to help him." The rescue team moved quickly, lifting Blake onto a stretcher and rushing him toward the airlock. As they carried him away, Blake summoned his remaining strength to turn his head toward the mother dragon. She was watching him go, her luminous eyes following his movement. The juvenile peeked out from behind her, its crystalline scales glittering with renewed health. "Thank you," Blake thought, hoping somehow she would understand. As the airlock closed behind them, Blake finally surrendered to unconsciousness. He awoke in the medical bay, the harsh white ceiling swimming into focus as his eyes adjusted to the light. A breathing mask covered his face, delivering oxygen-enriched air to his damaged lungs. Monitoring devices beeped softly, tracking his vital signs. "Welcome back," said a voice beside him. Blake turned his head to see Natalie Quinn sitting in a chair next to his bed, a data tablet in her lap and relief evident on her face. "How long?" His voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible through the mask. "3 days," Natalie replied. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. The doctors weren't sure you'd make it. The atmospheric toxins did significant damage to your respiratory system." Blake nodded weakly. "The Dracomorphs? They're fine, thanks to you. Dr. Vrexic has implemented permanent atmospheric modifications to the containment chamber based on your specifications. The juvenile is thriving." Natalie smiled. "And Dr. Keller has been removed from the research team pending an investigation into his actions." apparently attempting to sabotage valuable specimens and nearly killing a station employee crosses a line, even for him. Blake closed his eyes, relief washing over him. Good. There's something else you should know, Natalie continued. The mother Dracomorph has been different since you left the chamber. She spends hours watching the observation window, humming that same melody over and over. Dr. Vrexic thinks she's looking for you. Blake opened his eyes again. She saved my life. And you saved her child's. Natalie's expression grew serious. Blake, what you did was incredibly reckless. You could have died. I couldn't just let them die, Blake said simply. Not when I could help. Natalie shook her head, but there was admiration in her eyes. Well, your recklessness has earned you quite a reputation. The entire station is talking about the human janitor who risked his life to save an alien baby. Some of the diplomatic staff are calling it a watershed moment in interspecies relations. Blake would have laughed if his lungs didn't hurt so much. I'm just glad they're okay. More than okay. A new voice joined the conversation as Dr. Vrexic entered the medical bay. The juvenile's recovery has been remarkable, and the mother. He paused, his usually stern expression softening. The mother has been demonstrating behaviors we've never observed before. It seems your intervention has created something of a breakthrough. What kind of breakthrough? Blake asked. Dr. Vrexic approached the bed. The crystalline dracomorphs have always been classified as semi-sentient at best. Intelligent, certainly, but not on the level of species with developed civilizations or advanced communication. Your interaction with the mother has forced us to reconsider that assessment. He activated a holographic display above Blake's bed. It showed the containment chamber, where the mother dragon was engaged in what appeared to be deliberate, patterned movement. As they watched, she used her claws to arrange small objects on the chamber floor in geometric patterns. She's been doing this for the past 2 days, Dr. Vrexic explained, creating increasingly complex patterns and then vocalizing that same melodic sequence you first heard. We believe she's attempting to communicate. Blake watched in amazement. What is she trying to say? We're not certain yet. But based on the timing and the fact that she directs these displays toward the observation window, Dr. Vrexic met Blake's eyes. We think she's asking for you. Blake was released from the medical bay 3 days later, though with strict instructions to avoid any strenuous activity. His lungs were healing, but the damage from the toxic atmosphere would take time to fully repair. The station's medical nanites had accelerated the process, but even the most advanced technology had its limits. Dr. Vrexic had arranged for Blake to have special access to the Dracomorph containment chamber. No longer classified as restricted research specimens, the mother and her juvenile were now considered diplomatic guests of the station, a status change that had sent ripples of excitement and concern through Omega-7's administrative hierarchy. As Blake approached the observation area, he felt a flutter of nervousness. What if the connection he'd felt with the mother dragon had been a product of the extreme circumstances? What if, in his absence, she had returned to treating humans with the wariness any captive creature might show toward its captors? His concerns vanished the moment he stepped into view of the containment chamber. The mother dragon, who had been arranging small objects into complex patterns on the chamber floor, immediately abandoned her work. Her massive head swung toward the window, luminous eyes fixing directly on Blake. The melodic humming that had become her signature began instantly, rising and falling in what sounded unmistakably like excitement. She remembers you, Dr. Vrexic said, appearing at Blake's side. Even after all this time, the mother dragon approached the transparent barrier, pressing one clawed appendage against it as she had done during their first encounter. The juvenile, now noticeably larger and more active, bounded over to join her, its crystalline scales flashing with vibrant colors as it moved. Blake found himself moving closer to the window without conscious thought. He placed his hand against the transparent barrier, directly opposite the mother's claw. "Hello again," he said quietly. The mother's humming intensified, and to Blake's amazement, the juvenile began to mimic the sound, creating a harmonious duet that filled the observation area. "Extraordinary," Dr. Vrexic murmured. The juvenile has never attempted vocalization like this before. Blake watched as the mother dragon returned to her pattern on the chamber floor, gesturing with her head as if inviting him to observe. The pattern was indeed more complex than what he had seen in the holographic recordings. Concentric circles intersected by radial lines, with small objects placed at specific intersections. "What do you think she's trying to say?" Dr. Vrexic asked. Blake studied the pattern, feeling a strange sense of familiarity. "I'm not sure, but—" He paused, an idea forming. "Can I see a map of Talithia 4? Specifically, the region where the Dracomorphs were found?" Dr. Vrexic nodded to a nearby assistant, who quickly pulled up a holographic display of the moon. The topographical map showed a vast, cratered landscape with deep ravines and towering crystalline formations, an alien yet beautiful terrain. Blake examined the map, then looked back at the pattern the mother dragon had created. The resemblance was striking. The concentric circles corresponded to the crater systems of Talithia 4, and the radial lines matched the major ravines that cut through the landscape. "It is a map," Blake said, excitement building in his voice. "But not just any map. I think she's showing us something specific." He pointed to several of the objects placed at intersections within the pattern. "These markers, they're deliberate. They're highlighting locations." Dr. Vrexic leaned closer, his scientific curiosity fully engaged. "But locations of what?" Blake watched as the mother dragon rearranged some of the markers, her movements deliberate and precise. The juvenile observed attentively, occasionally chittering in what seemed like questions, to which the mother responded with short bursts of melodic humming. "She's teaching," Blake realized aloud. "She's teaching her child about their home." The insight struck him with sudden clarity. "Dr. Vrexic, I don't think these are just random locations. I think they're important sites for their species. Maybe nesting grounds, or food sources, or—" Blake's voice trailed off as a more profound possibility emerged. "Or maybe the locations of other dracomorphs." Dr. Vrexic's eyes widened. "Other members of their species? Are you suggesting they have a social structure more complex than we realized? Why else would she be so determined to communicate this information? And why teach it to her child if they weren't planning to return home eventually?" Blake looked at the scientist. "Dr. Vrexic, I think she's telling us that they're not just specimens. They're part of a community, a family." The scientist was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving between the dracomorphs and the pattern they had created. "If you're right, this changes everything. Our understanding of their intelligence level, their social structures, their conservation status." He shook his head, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. "And it means their capture and detention here is even more ethically problematic than I had realized." Blake didn't respond immediately. He was watching the mother dragon, who had paused in her pattern making to observe their reaction. There was an unmistakable intelligence in those luminous eyes, an awareness that communicated across the vast gulf of species difference. "She understands more than we've given her credit for," Blake said quietly. "She knows we're trying to comprehend what she's showing us." As if in confirmation, the mother dragon made a new sound, a short, sharp trill that commanded attention. She then used her claws to create a new pattern alongside the map. This one was simpler, a large circle with two smaller circles inside it. Blake stared at the new pattern, confusion giving way to stunned realization. "Is that us? The station?" Dr. Vrexic nodded slowly. Omega-7 has a central hub with two research rings. That's a schematic representation of the station's basic structure. The mother dragon wasn't just showing them her home. She was showing them where they were in relation to it. She was demonstrating not only spatial awareness, but abstract thinking, the ability to create symbolic representations of concepts. "This isn't just communication," Blake said, his voice hushed with awe. "This is sophisticated abstract reasoning. Dr. Vrexic, she's not semi-sentient. She's fully sentient, possibly on the level of human intelligence, just expressed differently." The scientist's professional composure cracked slightly, revealing genuine wonder. "In all my years of xenobiological research, I've never seen anything like this. Turner, Do you understand what this means? We may be witnessing first contact with a non-human intelligent species. Real first contact, not just interaction with another technological civilization, but communication across fundamentally different modes of existence. Blake nodded, the weight of the moment settling on him. From invisible janitor to the human conduit for communication with an alien intelligence, it was almost too much to comprehend. The mother dragon made another trilling sound, drawing their attention back to her display. She had added something new to her representation of the station, a small object placed outside the circles, connected to them by a straight line. What's she indicating now? Dr. Vrexic wondered. Blake studied the addition. It looks like she's showing something leaving the station. A ship, maybe? He looked at the scientist. Dr. Vrexic, I think she's asking to go home. Before the scientist could respond, the laboratory door slid open, and a group of uniformed officials entered. Their insignia identified them as representatives of the Galactic Regulatory Commission, the governing body responsible for oversight of all research involving potentially sentient species. Their leader, a stern-faced woman with commander's stripes, approached Dr. Vrexic. Dr. Vrexic, I am Commander Ellis of the GRC. We've received reports of unauthorized modifications to research protocols involving protected specimens, resulting in a security breach and injury to station personnel. We're here to investigate these claims and determine if sanctions are warranted. Dr. Vrexic straightened, his professional mask sliding back into place. Commander Ellis, I assure you all modifications were necessary for the specimen's survival. The incident report has been filed with full transparency. Commander Ellis's gaze shifted to Blake. And you must be Turner, the maintenance technician who interfered with established research protocols. Blake met her gaze steadily. I am. Your actions violated at least 7 different regulations governing research specimen handling. Under normal circumstances, that would result in immediate termination and possible criminal charges. Her expression remained stern, but something flickered in her eyes. Curiosity, perhaps. However, the station director has requested we consider mitigating factors before making our determination. Dr. Vrexic stepped forward. Commander, before you proceed with any punitive measures, there's something you need to see. He gestured toward the containment chamber. We've made a significant discovery regarding the crystalline dracomorphs. A discovery that may require reclassification of their sentient status. Commander Ellis frowned. Reclassification? On what grounds? Evidence of abstract reasoning, symbolic communication, and possible cultural knowledge transmission. Dr. Vrexic nodded toward Blake. Thanks to Turner's intervention, we've established a previously impossible level of communication with the specimens. The commander looked skeptical but moved toward the viewing window. Show me. For the next hour, Blake and Dr. Vrexic demonstrated the mother dragon's communication efforts, explaining the patterns and their significance. The mother, seemingly aware of the importance of this interaction, performed with remarkable clarity, even creating new variations of her patterns that further emphasized her intelligence. When they finished, Commander Ellis was silent for a long moment, her professional detachment visibly shaken. If what you're showing me is accurate, these aren't just research specimens. They're representatives of an intelligent species with rights under Galactic Accord Section 7. That's our assessment as well, Dr. Vrexic confirmed. And it raises serious questions about their continued detention here. The commander turned to her team. I want all the data compiled and transmitted to GRC headquarters immediately. We'll need a full sentience evaluation panel assembled. She looked back at the dracomorphs. In the meantime, these beings are to be treated as diplomatic guests rather than research specimens. Full comfort protocols, no invasive monitoring, and absolutely no experimentation without explicit consent from GRC headquarters. One of her subordinates spoke up. Commander, if they're reclassified as sentient, there will be pressure to return them to their home environment. The territorial dispute between the Arcturian Collective and the Terran Alliance complicates matters. Commander Ellis nodded grimly. I'm aware. That's a diplomatic nightmare we'll address when we have official reclassification. For now, focus on the immediate protocols. As the GRC team dispersed to begin their work, Commander Ellis turned back to Blake. Turner, your actions may have violated regulations, but they've also potentially identified an entirely new sentient species. That's not something I can ignore. Consider any charges dropped, though I suggest you follow proper channels in the future. Blake nodded. Thank you, Commander. After the GRC team departed, Dr. Vrexic let out a long breath. Well, that was unexpected, though perhaps it shouldn't have been. The political implications of a sentient species discovery in disputed territory are enormous. Blake wasn't listening. His attention had returned to the mother dragon, who was watching him with those luminous, intelligent eyes. She had moved to the transparent barrier again, her clawed appendage pressed against it in what had become their ritual of connection. She knows something has changed, Blake said quietly. She understands that we've recognized her intelligence. Dr. Vrexic joined him at the window. The question now is, what happens next? If they're officially classified as sentient, we can't keep them here as research subjects. But returning them to Talithia, for while the territorial dispute continues, could put them in danger from both sides. Blake placed his hand against the barrier opposite the mother's claw. We'll find a way to help them. We have to. Over the next few weeks, Celestial Station Omega 7 became the focal point of an unprecedented scientific and diplomatic effort. The GRC assembled a team of the galaxy's foremost experts in xenobiology, linguistics, and sentience evaluation. The Mother Dragon, now officially designated matriarch in all documentation, continued her communication efforts with increasing sophistication. Blake, in his new role as interspecies communication specialist, spent hours each day working with Matriarch, developing a rudimentary but functional system of symbolic exchange. They established shared references for basic concepts: danger, safety, food, home. With each successful communication, Matriarch seemed to gain confidence, her patterns becoming more nuanced and her vocalizations more varied. The juvenile, whom the research team had taken to calling Spark, due to the flashes of light that emanated from his crystalline scales when excited, showed remarkable learning capacity. He began creating his own simple patterns under Matriarch's guidance, demonstrating that the communication ability wasn't unique to her, but a learnable skill for their species. 3 weeks after the GRC's initial visit, Commander Ellis returned to the station with an official declaration. The crystalline dracomorphs had been classified as a fully sentient species with all the protections that status conferred under galactic law. This changes their legal status completely, she explained during a meeting with station leadership. They are no longer specimens, but diplomatic representatives of their species. As such, they have the right to return to their home environment if they choose to do so. Dr. Vrexic raised the obvious concern. The territorial dispute over Talithia 4 remains unresolved. Both the Arcturian Collective and the Terran Alliance continue to claim jurisdiction. Neither side has agreed to withdrawal. Commander Ellis nodded. That's the complicated part. The GRC has proposed a temporary solution: designation of Talithia 4 as a protected reserve under neutral GRC administration until the territorial claims can be resolved through proper diplomatic channels. Both sides are considering the proposal, but negotiations are moving slowly. Blake, who had been included in the meeting due to his unique relationship with the Dracomorphs, spoke up. What about Matriarch and Spark? How long will they have to wait? That's actually why I'm here, Commander Ellis said. The GRC has authorized a diplomatic mission to Talithia 4, ostensibly to conduct a comprehensive ecological survey, but actually to make initial contact with any dracomorph communities that might exist there. Given what Matriarch has communicated about social structures, we believe there may be established settlements. She turned to Blake. Turner, given your unique rapport with Matriarch, we'd like you to join the mission as a communication liaison. Dr. Vrexic would lead the scientific team. Blake felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. You want me to go to Talithia 4? To help contact her people? More than that, Commander Ellis said. We want you to help Matriarch and Spark return home. Who better to facilitate that transition than the human they've come to trust? The implications were overwhelming. From maintenance technician to interspecies diplomat in less than a month, it seemed impossible. Yet as Blake considered the opportunity, he realized how deeply he had come to care about Matriarch and Spark's welfare. The thought of helping them return to their home filled him with purpose. "When would we leave?" he asked. "The mission is scheduled to depart in 5 days. The GRC research vessel Horizon has already been outfitted with special containment systems to accommodate the Dracomorphs during transit." Commander Ellis studied him with newfound respect. "This won't be without risk, Turner. Talithia 4 is a hostile environment for humans, and will be operating in politically sensitive territory. Both the Arcturians and the Terran Alliance have grudgingly approved the mission, but neither is particularly happy about it." Blake nodded, understanding the dangers but unwavering in his decision. "I'll go. They deserve to go home, and I want to help make that happen." The preparations for the mission to Talithia 4 consumed the next 5 days. Blake underwent crash courses in xenodiplomacy, basic survival techniques for hostile environments, and preliminary briefings on what little was known about Talithia IV's ecology. Dr. Vrexic assembled a research team of specialists from various fields, all vetted by the GRC for their experience with potentially sentient species. The most challenging aspect was preparing for Matriarch and Spark's transfer to the Horizon. The specialized containment system needed to maintain the precise atmospheric composition they required while also providing comfortable accommodations for what were now recognized as diplomatic representatives rather than research specimens. Blake spent hours each day with Matriarch, using their developing communication system to explain the journey ahead. He wasn't certain how much she comprehended, but her responses suggested at least a basic understanding of the concept of returning home. On the day of departure, Blake stood in the observation area as the technical team made final preparations for the transfer. Matriarch and Spark were unusually still, watching the activity around their containment chamber with alert attention. "They sense something important is happening," Natalie observed, standing beside Blake. She had volunteered to join the mission as a research assistant, citing her experience with the Dracomorph's atmospheric requirements. Blake nodded. "I think they know they're going home." The transfer process began with the gradual equalization of atmospheres between the station containment chamber and the specialized transport unit. As the connecting airlock sealed into place, Blake held his breath, worried about how the Dracomorphs would react to the change in their environment. He needn't have worried. As the airlock opened, revealing the passage to the transport unit, Matriarch calmly guided Spark forward. There was no hesitation, no fear, just deliberate movement toward what would carry them back to their home. Once the Dracomorphs were secured in the transport unit, the final preparations for departure began. Blake found himself standing at a viewport, watching as the massive research vessel Horizon came into view against the backdrop of stars. Soon, they would board that ship and begin the journey to Talithia 4. "Nervous?" Dr. Vrexic asked, joining him at the viewport. "A little," Blake admitted. "Everything's happened so fast. A month ago, I was just a janitor. Now I'm about to travel to an alien moon as part of a diplomatic mission." Dr. Vrexic's usually stern expression softened slightly. "Life rarely follows the paths we expect, Turner. Sometimes the most significant journeys begin with the smallest acts of compassion." He looked out at the horizon. "What you did for Matriarch and Spark was extraordinary not because it was heroic, but because it was human. You saw suffering and acted to alleviate it, regardless of species or regulation." Blake considered this. "I just did what seemed right. And in doing so, you may have changed how 2 civilizations understand an entire species." Dr. Vrexic turned to face him directly. "Remember that, when you doubt your place on this mission." The journey to Talithia 4 took 1 standard week. During that time, Blake continued working with Matriarch to refine their communication system. Each day, her patterns grew more complex, and her ability to convey abstract concepts more sophisticated. Blake found himself increasingly awed by her intelligence and determination. As they approached Talithia 4, the excitement among the crew was palpable. This was potentially one of the most significant first contact missions in recent galactic history, the establishment of diplomatic relations with an entirely new sentient species. Blake spent most of his time in the specialized containment area where Matriarch and Spark were housed. Through the viewing panel, he could see that both Dracomorphs were unusually active, moving around their space with what appeared to be excitement. They know we're close to home, Blake realized. They can sense it somehow. When Matriarch noticed him watching, she immediately approached the panel. Using their established communication system, she created a pattern on the floor that Blake recognized as their symbol for home, followed by a questioning gesture they had developed to indicate uncertainty or inquiry. Yes, Blake confirmed, using the hand signals they had established alongside their symbol system. Home soon. Very soon. From space, Talithia 4 was a breathtaking sight, a crystalline sphere that caught and refracted the light of its parent gas giant, creating prismatic patterns across its surface. The northern hemisphere, where they believed the Dracomorph communities were located, glittered with particular intensity, suggesting dense concentrations of the same crystalline structures that composed Matriarch and Spark scales. The landing team assembled in the Horizon's shuttle bay, all dressed in full environmental suits designed to protect them from Talithia IV's toxic atmosphere. The transport unit containing Matriarch and Spark was secured in the center of the shuttle, its systems humming softly as they maintained the perfect atmospheric balance for the Dracomorphs. Final checks complete, the shuttle pilot announced. All systems nominal. We are cleared for departure in 2 minutes. Blake moved to the viewing panel of the transport unit. Inside, Matriarch and Spark were alert and active, their crystalline scales glittering with intense colors that Blake had never seen them display before. Matriarch noticed him watching and approached the panel, making the now familiar gesture of pressing her claw against it. Blake placed his gloved hand against the panel in response. "We're taking you home," he said, even though the helmet of his environmental suit prevented her from hearing him. "Just like I promised." The shuttle touched down on a flat expanse of crystalline ground, the landing struts adjusting to the unusual surface texture. Outside, the landscape glittered under the combined light of the distant sun and the reflected glow of the gas giant that dominated the sky. Atmospheric composition confirmed hostile to human life, the pilot announced. Environmental suits required for all personnel exiting the shuttle. Commander Ellis turned to the team. Standard first contact protocols. No weapons displayed unless direct threat is detected. Turner leads the communication effort, with Dr. Vrexic advising. Security team maintains perimeter but does not engage unless specifically ordered. She looked at Blake. "Are you ready to make history, Turner?" Blake nodded, his mouth dry with anticipation. "Let's bring them home." The shuttle's ramp descended, revealing the crystalline landscape of Talithia 4. Blake was the first to step onto the alien surface, the boots of his environmental suit crunching slightly on the glittering ground. The transport unit containing Matriarch and Spark followed, guided by robotic supports programmed to navigate the unfamiliar terrain. They had advanced perhaps 50 meters from the shuttle when Blake saw them, shapes moving among the crystalline formations in the distance. At first, they were just flashes of prismatic light, like sunlight reflecting off moving glass. Then they resolved into distinct forms, Dracomorphs, similar to Matriarch, but in a stunning variety of sizes and color patterns. They emerged from ravines and crystal formations, moving with a fluid grace that Matriarch had never been able to display in the confines of her containment chamber. Some were massive, nearly twice Matriarch's size, while others were closer to Spark's proportions. Their scales caught and refracted the light in hypnotic patterns, creating a living light show that left Blake breathless with wonder. "My God," Dr. Vrexic whispered over the suit's communication system. "There must be dozens of them. A full community." Inside the transport unit, Matriarch had begun that resonant humming that Blake associated with profound emotion. It was louder now, more complex, with harmonics that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath their feet. To Blake's amazement, The approaching dracomorphs responded in kind, their combined humming creating a symphony of sound that he felt rather than heard through his environmental suit. The patterns of light reflecting from their scales changed, synchronizing into pulsating waves that moved through the assembled group like a visual language. They're communicating, Blake realized aloud. Not just with sound, but with light patterns. The approaching dracomorphs stopped about 20 meters away, forming a semicircle around the human party and the transport unit. One particularly large individual with scales that shifted primarily between deep blue and violet moved slightly ahead of the others. Its luminous eyes fixed first on the humans, then on the transport unit containing Matriarch and Spark. "I think that's their leader," Blake said quietly. "Or at least a representative." Following their established protocol, Blake stepped forward, making the gesture of open hands that they had prepared as a universal sign of peaceful intent. The leader dracomorph watched him with unblinking attention, its head tilted in what seemed like curiosity. Blake turned to the technician controlling the transport unit systems. "It's time to open it," he said. "Let them out." The technician hesitated. "Are you sure it's safe? We don't know how these wild dracomorphs will react." "They're not wild," Blake corrected firmly. "They're Matriarch and Spark's people, and they've been waiting long enough to go home." After a nod from Commander Ellis, the technician activated the release sequence. The transport unit's outer shell reconfigured, creating an opening that matched the atmosphere of Talithia 4. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Matriarch emerged, her crystalline scales blazing with colors more vivid than Blake had ever seen. Spark followed close behind, his smaller form practically vibrating with excitement. The assembled dracomorphs erupted in a chorus of humming and light patterns. The leader moved forward to meet Matriarch, and the two beings touched foreheads in what seemed like a greeting of profound significance. Light patterns cascaded between them, creating a dazzling display that Blake could only interpret as communication of the deepest kind. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only minutes, the leader dracomorph turned its attention to the humans. It approached Blake directly, its luminous eyes studying him with intense focus. Then, to everyone's amazement, it lowered its massive head in what could only be interpreted as a bow. "I think," Dr. Vrexic said softly, "it's thanking you." Blake stood frozen, overwhelmed by the moment. The leader straightened and then, in a gesture that left the entire human contingent speechless, it used its claws to create a pattern in the crystalline ground. The same symbol for friend that Blake and Matriarch had developed during their communication sessions. "They understand," Blake whispered. "They know we brought them home." The leader dracomorph made a series of complex light patterns that seemed directed at Commander Ellis. The meaning was unclear until Matriarch approached and created a pattern that Blake recognized as their symbol for stay, followed by talk. "I think," Blake said slowly, "they're inviting us to remain, to establish communication, to build a relationship." Commander Ellis nodded. "Tell them we accept. Tell them we come in peace and friendship." Using the symbolic language he had developed with Matriarch, Blake conveyed the message as best he could. The leader dracomorph responded with a burst of harmonious humming that resonated through the crystalline landscape. As the diplomatic protocols began in earnest, Blake found a moment to approach Matriarch one last time. She was surrounded by other dracomorphs, clearly being welcomed back into her community, but she broke away when she saw him approaching. "You're home now," Blake said, knowing she couldn't hear his words, but hoping she understood his intent. "With your people, where you belong." Matriarch touched her claw to his suit's faceplate, the closest approximation of their ritual that was possible under the circumstances. Then she created one final pattern in the ground between them, the symbols for friend and always. "Always," Blake agreed, blinking back unexpected tears. "No matter how far apart we are." Matriarch rejoined her people, Spark bounding joyfully at her side. As Blake watched them move away, integrated seamlessly into the community of light and crystal and harmony, he felt a profound sense of completion. The desperate mother dragon begging to save her baby had found not just healing for her child, but a path home for both of them. A path that might never have opened without a human janitor who had stopped to listen when no one else would. 6 months later, Blake stood at the observation window of the newly established Talithia 4 diplomatic outpost. The crystalline landscape stretched before him, glittering under the alien sky. In the distance, dracomorph forms moved with fluid grace, their scales catching and refracting light in the elaborate patterns that humans now understood were a sophisticated language in themselves. The GRC has officially recognized Talithia 4 as the sovereign territory of the crystalline dracomorphs, Natalie said, joining him at the window. Both the Arcturian Collective and the Terran Alliance have withdrawn their territorial claims in exchange for limited research access under dracomorph supervision. So they're free, Blake said, truly free to live their lives without interference. Thanks to you, Natalie replied. Your recommendation for full sovereign status carried a lot of weight with the Commission. Blake shook his head. I just told the truth about what I saw. Their intelligence, their social structures, their right to self-determination, it was all there from the beginning. We just weren't listening. Well, we're listening now. The Cultural Exchange Program has already enrolled 20 human specialists eager to learn the Dracomorph communication system. And 3 Dracomorph representatives have volunteered to visit Celestial Station Omega 7 as official ambassadors. Blake smiled. Matriarch. Of course. She specifically requested you as her liaison. Natalie grinned. She refuses to work with anyone else. As if summoned by their conversation, a familiar form appeared on the crystalline plane before the outpost. Matriarch, her scales glittering in the alien sunlight, created a pattern in the ground that Blake could read even at this distance. The symbols for friend and visit and now. Duty calls, Blake said with a smile. The ambassador is requesting my presence. As he donned his environmental suit and prepared to go meet Matriarch, Blake reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. From invisible janitor to interspecies diplomat, from a man who cleaned floors to a man who had helped bridge the gap between 2 vastly different forms of intelligence. All because he had stopped to listen when a mother dragon begged to save her baby. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.